This is fight night.
I know in many, many movies, I am watching as two of these characters are displaying the characterization of the action all through these huge sword blows, and the whole time I'm looking at them, yelling to the protagonist loudly in my mind, thrust, thrust, just hit him with a thrust. So the audience in Shakespeare's time was very astute in how they looked at sword fighting. They were very familiar with the sword and buckler, as we see here on the stage. It was a weapon of war. It was a weapon of peace, in that it was one that was fought on the streets as part of self-defense, for exercise, and in sword fighting schools like ours. Where Silver felt it was an honest weapon was that it was one key towards defense and utility. You could use it for defense. You could carry it easily. You could bring it out to the battlefield. Rapiers were these very, very long weapons. That in fact in London they had to enact a law because the Spanish coming to London had these long, long rapiers that were 40, 50, 60 inches long, and they had a block at the gate, and they had to chop off anything that was longer than 40 inches. So this weapon, as you can see, used the sword and the buckler together, allowed a skilled swordsman to maneuver around the buckler. It's a very small shield, but it really emphasizes the way that the swordsman could move his weapon, striking on one side or the other. It was an athletic form, and in both the Italian and the British style, it was done in a very upright and proud manner. The audience would understand that this is something of deftness. It could move between the cut and the thrust. They could see feints and deceptions, because this was a very deceptive weapon. They would see the difference between an intentional miss and an accidental one. They might also understand the humiliation. If someone delivered a strike with the flat, it wasn't a mistake on the part of the player if it was an enacted stage play. It was actually an insult delivered with intention. To strike with the flat showed I could have killed you. So this weapon was one that this audience knew well, and it was a weapon that sung the nationalist pride of England. Thank you. Now comes the invading fashions of the continent. With the clothes and the styles of the time also comes the cultural practices and the weapons. And the British gentry and nobility were fascinated with the ideals of dueling. Dueling was a fashion that came very late to England. So in England was always doing something a little bit different than the rest of the continent. But in Italy, the idea of the duel had been brewing in sort of the machismo heart of the Italian spirit. And it was also something that was defining a difference between the nobility and a rising middle class. Only nobles had honor, and so only they had to fight for their honor. And so that idea really stuck into the minds of the nobility of England, who wanted to also show their place, their difference from the common class. Now, the rapier was athletic. It was postured very, very differently, very aggressive postures, leaning forward and back, movements off the line. It was very deft. It was also an intelligent weapon, in that with it in these manuals came everything from geometry and mathematics to comparing the movements of the sword to the movement of celestial bodies. So, in fact, many of the writers, a gentleman named Camillo Agrippa, who was really the grandfather of the rapier, he said that we know that the art of the rapier is perfect because we've derived its movements from watching the movements of the planets. So they made some pretty odd links to come up with how this was the perfect art. But what this also did is it meant you needed to be someone who had the time to study this art. It was not something you could pick up and practice with moves in the yard and then learn the rest you needed out on the battlefield. You needed to have someone who could study, you needed to be able to read. It was again something that defined your noble bearing. But it was also a weapon that emphasized the attack, certainly in the Italian style, over the defense. Meaning, the English thought of defend and then counterattack, whereas the Italians thought defend and counterattack. Let's bring both together, because then the opponent has less time to respond. So as an educated audience, which I hope you will all be, I'll ruin movies for you forever, I want you to be able to see how in the rapier fight, they are trying to find advantage, and they're trying to find that moment when they can strike, attack, and defense simultaneously, or to deceive the opponent out of position. Right on cue. Thank you very much. Now, it's very easy to think of, to see now as modern people, when we go to a museum, we see all these different swords and they have little date plaques on them showing what time they're from. We might have this sense that there were swords and bucklers, and then suddenly people decided, oh, longsword is the thing, and a little memo went out, and everybody came in, and they had to give up their swords and bucklers. They're all handed longswords, so okay, it's longsword time now. And then they all fight with longswords for 100 years, and then they would all get their longswords taken away, and they'd be given side swords and bucklers, and then they'd be given rapiers. Swords lived all in coexistence with one another, in London as well as on the continent. You needed to be able to fence with not only a rapier in the London Masters of Defense, but also the sword and buckler, and with the longsword, with the quarterstaff, the spear, and many other different devices and weapons. As I'm sure I'm hearing less clatter of swords, maybe there's some wrestling going on back there as well. Also, an important part of these arts. So the longsword is a very versatile weapon. It's used on battlefields, to fight in corridors, for civil defense. It also combined the wrestling as well as the sword work together. And as a member of the nobility or the upper gentry learning to sword fight, it was still a required weapon to learn in your studies. So if you were seeking out the opportunity to study, you would have to study many of these weapons, and you would learn them as we do in our school. One weapon and unarmed fighting, and then you would learn 2 weapons and then 3, and you'd be forced to rigorously study those arts. As we are now in modern martial arts schools and schools like ours that have European tradition, there were different ranks in schools then. A student of the art would actually start very young, but then as they became mature to an adult, they would start studying in a school like we had in England, which was the London Masters of Defense, was the core, and they actually had teachers outside of London. And those are the ones who George Silver was representing, who he felt very affronted by these continental masters coming to teach their arts. And unfortunately, I kind of represent the continental masters because I teach an Italian art. But we, both in the Italian tradition as well as in the British tradition, there was a way of studying and of testing called a prize play. So we know that right from the beginning of the show, Christopher Gaze talked about having a boxing match. So prize fights from boxing actually derives from these prizes that were fought between a student and challengers, the player and the challengers. So after I'd been studying in the London Masters, for example, for 7 years, I would then challenge at 2 forms of weapons. I would fight that challenge against other senior students in the school, and if I was seen worthy by the masters who came from all over to attend, then I would graduate to the next level. If I failed, I would have to wait 7 more years to test again. If I graduated in that rank, I would have to wait 7 years to graduate to the next one. So this was a lifelong study. And here now my students are like, 5 years to get my 3rd level. That's ridiculous. It really was something that people lived and died by, so it was very, very important. Now, in a prize fight, part of what we know is the money part of it. What they would do is prize fights were actually public spectacles, a way of advertising the school. So in a theater like this, perhaps the Globe, we know had prize fights in it. On a dark night, there would be a prize play. And a huge audience would come, and this was an opportunity for them to see these people in action, maybe see an injury happen. They often wore protective gear, but often they did not. But we know they wore helmets. And fought with blunted swords, as we do here in our prize play, which you're about to see. Now the audience would also, if they liked what they saw, they would throw money, and that's where the money part came. And we really like to maintain this tradition. So feel free, maybe keep it to bills. Coins might be a little injurious, but we did wear protective gear for it. So tonight we have something very exciting. We're going to do some fighting in earnest. So we have 2 challengers. Players. Our first person playing the prize is Adrian Jones. You'll be playing the prize at the single rapier and the rapier and dagger. We have a host of challengers who are representing, these are all our senior students at Academie Duello, all of them have been studying for years. And you're going to get to see an opportunity, none of this is choreographed now, this is the sword fighting that the people of Shakespeare's time knew. Salute. On guard. Begin. This is Clinton Fernandez across from Adrian. Strike into the belly of the player. It's Greg Yoshida. Strike into the throat of the player. So you can see the first part, they're trying to find advantage over each other's swords. That's all the movement from one side to the other. There, strike into the body of the player as well as into the challenger. Very nice. Strike into the body of the challenger. This is Andre Acosta. Strike into the arm, nope, into the sleeve. Called back. It took only 4 ounces of pressure for the rapier to go through your clothing and through you. Strike into the face of the challenger. Last pass. Strike into the arm of the challenger. Well done, under a single rating. Dominance over the buckler. There was a quote from a couple sources where I believe actually Oscar Wilde made a comment about the buckler being replaced because the rapier would strike the buckler and skip off and just hit you somewhere else. So the dagger was used like a small sword to deflect the sword of the opponent. Salute. On guard. Begin. If you guys see something you like, you can give it a good cheer. You can get your energy out there. Bullocks to the bar! Nothing there. Pass by. Now the rapier and the dagger are used together to make the defense on one side and the other. Strike into the body of the player. Oh, nice. Strike into the body of the player. That's where they bring it, guys. Strike into the face of the challenger. So the cloak off your back could be an excellent tool for defending yourself against an opponent. It was an excellent distraction as well as a good way to protect your arm. Oh, he survives! That last was Mateus with the cloak. Here, the small buckler was used with the rapier as well, but the rapier stayed more point on than the sword and buckler. Oh, a strike into the thigh of the player. Well struck. Last pass. No, I think that was. Do that again. No good hit. Let's make it a good one. Give a cheer, guys. It's Walker Lynch across from Adrian there. Nice, fair. Hayden will be playing a prize with a long sword and 2 swords. Salute. On guard. Begin. Strike into the face, followed by a strike to the body of the challenger. Cut into the face of the player. There's still an effort to cover the initial space to keep yourself protected before you enter, as opposed to entering with your face. So you can see they're always cautious about their distance first. Ooh, thrust into the body. Strike into the head of the player.
Business.
There, grapple, tearing down the arm, strike to the back of the head. There's a gasp from the crowd. Oh, tries to return the favor of last time. Ah, cut across the throat of the challenger. Last pass, Walker again. Bollocks to the mud! No. There, strike to the mask. So now we're going to see something that does not get played very often, and it is the play of the 2 swords. So 2 shorter, both either back swords, or in this case, side swords, which comes from the Italian spada da lato, which means sword you wear at your side, would be fought. These are schiavonas. They're a type of broadsword that protect the hand. They're going to be used together, and we're going to see different secondaries on the parts of the challengers, from bucklers to daggers. Salute. On guard. Begin. Cut across the body of the challenger. Cut to the arm of the challenger. Well struck. It's a fearsome one. Strike across the shoulder of the challenger and across the leg of the player. Here, the side sword and dagger. There, straight across the legs, across the head. Ooh, a strike into the arm, well received by Greg Gazita against the player. There, case of rapier, long rapier. Cut across the body of the challenger. Last pass. There, strike, double blow across the head. Well done, Eric. Good round of applause.